Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Gear Priority Podcast. My name is Justin, and today we are diving deep into a clothing fabric that is taking the world by storm. Enough so that some are calling it the Merino killer. The fabric we're talking about is alpaca wool, and I'm joined by John Gage, the co-founder of the company Appalachian Gear Company, who makes a bunch of different alpaca wool products, including the 80/20 sun hoodie, which I've worn for 5 days straight of hiking and sleeping. So I have some experience with this product. I've been using it a bunch more on hiking and backpacking trips. Welcome, John. How are you? And where are you calling in from?
Calling in from the big city of Charlotte, North Carolina. It's nice to meet you in video, Justin.
Yeah, nice to meet you as well. I read that.
I like the Merino killer too. That's I might use that.
Nice. Well, that's. I feel like most people are familiar with Merino. So as we kind of talk about alpaca wool today, we'll probably be doing some comparisons to Merino and talking about it because it's a nice baseline to have. And I think for a lot of people out there, they're going to be alpaca is going to be a consideration in lieu of Merino or part of the system in total. So yeah. So I read that you and your co-founder partner Mike have been in the textile industry for is it over 25 years?
Yeah, that actually makes me feel younger. It's 35 years.
35 years.
I've earned this gray hair. I promise you. Yeah, we my degree is in textiles actually. I might be one of the last people in the world that decided to go into that in college. And we've just, there was actually no history of textiles in my family, but in Mike's family, my partner is Mike Hawkins. His family went way back in the textile industry, and they were on the textile chemical side, dyes and chemicals. And we actually, little known fact, we met when we were 13, and we went to the same junior high school. And we kind of lost track. He wound up going off to school in high school. And then another coincidence is that we had a common friend that we were both good friends with, but we never were in the same place at the same time. And we were both in this guy's wedding. And so when all the groomsmen got together for the first time, we were looking at each other. I was like, I know you from somewhere. And, it had been at that point 11 or 12 years since I'd seen him. And it turned out I was in the textile industry and he was too. And rest is history.
That's awesome. So how long has Appalachian Gear Company been around then? When did you guys start that up?
Well, officially we incorporated in 2017, but Mike and I have another business that we started back in 2008, 2009. And I got the idea to start investigating alpaca as a fiber back around that same time. We at that particular time we were not in the textile industry. We had been partners in another business in the 90s, and when the textile industry left the States, the entire domestic apparel industry just vanished over a 6 or 7 year period from the late 90s to the early 2000s. And we were a part of the supply chain. So, we were left with really no customers. And we had produced everything. I mean, every kind of sports fabric and fashion fabric and every kind of fiber, except for alpaca. But we had dyed plenty of wool. And so we really, around 2008, 2009, I started thinking about alpaca as a fiber, and I really wanted to try to get back in the textile industry. And the funny thing is, it took me until 2015 to convince Mike to do it. And so originally, I had found alpaca through a friend of mine who, when we were talking about different ways that I might try to re-enter the textile industry, and it turned out that the idea of alpaca craft had really started growing. So my original idea was not what we're doing now. My original idea was to go around and find alpaca fiber at farms because raising alpacas became a thing in the United States, and then to spin that alpaca into yarn and sell it into the craft industry. So my original idea had nothing to do with backpacking, but had started backpacking at the time. The tie-in to the industry we're in is that I've always been an outdoors person, and when I was a kid, elementary and junior high age, I did a lot of backpacking and went to some really well thought of outdoor camps, and that's where I really found a love for the outdoors. And I was the only one in my family that liked doing it. We all played. I've got two brothers, and we played team sports, and we did all the regular things, but they weren't much for going out sleeping in tents, and I loved it. And so what really kind of propelled me into this was in the early 2000s, in between when got out of the textile industry the first time, when I was getting back in, I was doing a lot of backpacking with my kids who were elementary and junior high, and we went everywhere. I mean, we did a bunch of sections on the AT, and we did some fails out in Idaho, and one of my sons, they both work with us, and one of my sons is an Eagle Scout. The other one went to Knowles along the way. Both of them wound up being long-term counselors at the camp I went to as a kid. So they were both continuously certified wilderness first responders. And so along the way, we started wearing Merino wool. And, I was already thinking about alpaca. So one day I went and I was talking to my partner, Mike, and I'm like, we wear a lot of Merino wool stuff. Why can't we make alpaca into a garment? And he said, well, what the hell are you talking about? And so I started explaining the whole thing to him, and he just was, kind of dumbfounded by it. We'd never thought of this. And that was 4 or 5 years before we really decided to get serious about it. So we started getting serious about it in 2016. Finally, I ragged on him so much for so many years. I mean, again, we're old, so we play the long game, and I finally wore him down. And he said, we had gone different ways after we were partners the first time. I got out of the textile industry for a few years, and I was in the technology business. He stayed in the textile industry and traveled all over the world, and he did a lot of really interesting things. And so he said, if we're going to do this, there's a guy that we need to talk to. And so he brought this guy in who works for us now. And so Mike and I were more dyeing and finishing generalist. We weren't necessarily knitting gurus, but we had both developed a ton of fabric. I mean, we've developed fabric from the ground up. So, so this guy comes in, and this is 2016 now. I'll be quick with the story. I'll get up to when we started up and then let you ask another question. So this guy Mike said, if anybody in the world can do it, this guy can do it. And so he came in, and I told him what I want to do. I want to make a 100% lightweight alpaca t-shirt. That's the first thing that we wanted to make. The fleece wasn't even a thought at that point. And he said, his name's Carl, and he said, nope, you can't do it. We tried that in the 70s, and you can't do it. You can't knit that stuff. I'll shoot myself in the head if you want. And I said, wait a minute. I've been researching this. We're all textile guys. We've got all these decades of experience. There's no way that you can't make this into a lightweight performance garment if you can make Merino into the light. And he said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give me 2 weeks and let me think about it. Because I told him, I said, if we could start from scratch and you don't have any constraints about the type of machinery we can use, could you do it? He said, give me 2 weeks and I'll get back with you. And a couple weeks later, he said, if you'll let me build a machine, I think we can do it. And I was like, okay. And he actually worked a deal with somebody to go in. We went into a used machine company that was friends of his. We've got a network like every business has these networks. And I watched him build a knitting machine from basically a frame. And a knitting machine, just for those that might watch the podcast, if you look at any of our reels on Instagram, or we've got some videos on YouTube. You can see the knitting machine. So a circular knitting machine is like a giant Swiss watch in that it's got a lot of moving parts, and some are spinning this way and some are spinning that way. And it's really an intricate machine. And I watched him build this thing from a literal frame. And we had bought, we thought we were so smart, and we had bought a bunch of yarn. And alpaca is expensive. Alpaca fiber, and it's one of the things people in the market don't really understand. But for us to be meeting merino prices and doing it in the States is really a major feat, because alpaca is many times more expensive than merino, 4 or 5 times more expensive. So we had bought this yarn, and we thought we were so smart. I thought I knew what to buy. It was my spec. We weren't buying off-the-shelf yarns. In fact, nobody in the States could make what we were trying to make. The reason we import yarn from Peru is because one of the co-ops here in the States said, you'll have to find somebody in Peru to make what you're making. We can't do it. And we spent thousands of dollars on this yarn. We loaded it up on the machine, and it ran for about 30 seconds or a minute, and the yarn just flew all to hell. And we were like, son of a bitch, we have wasted all of our money. And but we were like, no, let's keep trying it. And these machines, just so you know, if you're knitting cotton, they just run 24/7. They might have a yarn break every now and then. So by the 3rd or 4th day, we got the machine up to 4 minutes. And Mike and I literally high-fived each other and said, we can do this. I mean, these machines are supposed to run continuously, and we thought we had it made, and we got to 4 minutes. Anyway, that's how it started. And so we bought the parts. We built a machine. We started up a little R&D. We basically put 100% of the profit from our other business into starting up Appalachian Gear. We literally ruined one company to start this company because we believed in it so much. And so it took us from 2016 through 2018 to develop the process. And I'm not gonna beat you over the head with all that, but basically it was an iterative process. Every time we thought we had it made, we ran into some other issue, and we could not get this fabric made. And it just took us years. And as it turns out, it's a combination of having the right fiber and yarn specs, and having the right customizations on these machines, and thinking outside the box. It's what we're doing is very non-standard. I always joke that my old textile engineer friends would laugh at us. We can't let people watch what we're doing. We had a patent pending status for a while, and then we realized, well, if this thing ever publishes, then people can look at what we're doing, and they can conceive of other ways to get around it. And so we're using the Coca-Cola method. There are things that if you look in the plant, you can't necessarily understand what we're doing. There's certain techniques, and it's a very, very intricate process. There are a lot of things we had to figure out. That's alpaca fiber is the craziest thing in the world to work with. But once you get it put in the form in which we sell it in shirts with the 80/20 and the fleece that's the 100%, it's crazy how good it works. And but yes, it was a long, hard process, and most of the time we thought we weren't going to be able to get it done. But yeah, it's that old, you just have to stick with it.
That's amazing. That's a long process. I'd realize that it would be so difficult to kind of take. I thought it'd be very similar to like kind of merino wool as far as the process, but it sounds like it was a much longer journey to get from kind of where you guys were when you first started getting the fibers and making them into a fabric.
And I know you wanted to ask some questions about merino versus alpaca. How are they similar and how are they different? And I could jump into that, or because it was a good segue, or if you wanted to ask a few things before that.
Yeah, I think let's go through some rapid fire questions just to get to know you a little bit more, and then we'll definitely get into the characteristics of alpaca wool, and compared to merino wool. I think one of the things I want to follow up on too is you talked a little bit about alpaca wool being difficult to work with. So I'd like to expand on that a little bit more in a little bit here as well. But let's start off with the first rapid fire question. And this is one, maybe this is just because I'm in Canada and we don't encounter this word much, but what's the proper way to say the first word in your brand's name?
Oh man, it's a hard CH. It's Appalachian. But
Appalachian.
If anybody says Appalachian, that's fine with me. But it's Appalachian.
Appalachian. Okay, I'll have to practice that, because I think up here we say Appalachian a lot more commonly. And
northwestern states, they all say Appalachian too. I'm not sure who started that conspiracy about Appalachian, but it's Appalachian.
Sounds good. Okay, good to know. What are your favorite 2 outdoor activities?
Backpacking and chilling beside a glacial lake.
Nice. Those are good ones. And what Appalachian Gear Company product do you think you wear the most?
You know what? Interestingly, it's a two-part question. So in the fall and the winter, it's definitely the hoodie. But since we came out with the 80-20, I would say it's the 80-20 sun hoodie. And the sun hoodie is a little bit of a, it's not the most descriptive term. And the funny thing is, we call it the sun hoodie because the good SEO. I mean, there's so many sun hoodies out there, but it's really such an awesome, lightweight, multi-purpose, an ultralight multi-purpose hoodie. And it's got all the attributes of alpaca with better warm weather attributes because of the tencel. So I would say most of the time I have one of those on or underneath something. Yeah.
It's a good one. So yeah, and if you could travel to, what's a place on your bucket list for travel that you'd like to get to, whether it's kind of a local place or international, you can take it wherever you want.
I would like to go up to the Canadian Rockies. I've never been, and I've been to, in the old days, I was in the automotive textile industry, and I went to Windsor a good bit, but that's not really the Canada I want to go to. I want to go into the woods. I want to go where D.B. Cooper and Bigfoot live.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, no one really ever needs to go to Windsor.
Yeah,
to visit.
Yeah.
So yeah. Well, if you ever get up here, let me know, and give you some good spots to go to, and maybe tag along. It's beautiful. So let's roll things back. We've kind of talked about alpaca wool in a sense, but let's bring it back and talk about what alpaca wool actually is. I think most people are probably, I think it's kind of descriptive. It's from alpaca animals, but maybe we can get a little bit more into kind of why that matters, and maybe linking that into where alpaca wool comes from, because I think both those things kind of play in together into what makes alpaca wool special.
So first of all, alpaca, and the term alpaca wool is very much accepted, but it's a little misleading because in actuality, alpaca is hair. Alpaca is more like your hair than it is like merino wool. In the outward physical structure of it. Alpaca and merino and our hair are all basically classified as protein fiber. So they all act the same way. So the thing about a protein fiber, whether it's merino or alpaca or mohair or anything, they all have that awesome property that keep you warm when they're wet. Nothing else does that. And that's why all the animal fibers are great. Merino sheep were traditionally raised in mountainous regions that were damper and cool. And so sheep have lanolin, which is a grease, and that's a protective grease for their skin and the wool. Alpacas were raised, or they were bred. Most people don't realize alpacas didn't evolve. They were bred down in Peru thousands of years ago from a smaller animal that looks like an alpaca called a vacuna, which still exists, and a larger animal, which everybody knows is the llama. And so the alpaca is sized in between those animals, and alpacas are nice, whereas llamas are mean. And and but the alpaca fiber is super fine, and it's more like hair. And when I say it's more like hair, it doesn't have grease, it doesn't have lanolin. The alpacas were raised in a very arid, high altitude climate, so they have to put up with situations that are dry and hot and warm weather, and dry and super cold. And so that fiber has to insulate them and keep them cool. Same thing with merino sheep, but the lanolin part of the merino is kind of what makes that fiber or helps protect merino sheep against moisture, which brings up another difference. So they're similar in that they're both animal fibers, but the lanolin provides some waterproofness for merino. But when you strip that away, merino wool actually absorbs 30% of its weight in water, whereas the alpaca doesn't have any protective grease, and that fiber is actually, when I test it, it tests as water resistant, not waterproof. That's a different thing. Or it's not water repellent. That's a different thing, and that's important because alpaca still breathes. And I don't want to get into the whole moisture wicking thing, but I will, since people are going to watch this, I do want to say the term moisture wicking was invented by the polyester industry, because the old school polyester from the 70s and the 80s was like wearing plastic bags, and you could not wear it. And then so they had to invent chemicals to put on polyester to make it wick moisture, and so alpaca doesn't really absorb much moisture, but it does allow moisture to creep around it. It doesn't push it back to your body. That's what allows it to cool. Merino does the same thing, but merino wants to hold on to more of the water, and that's a important distinction between the two fibers.
Yeah, that's a big one, and we'll definitely get into some of the characteristics here. I just want you brought up a big point that I just want to kind of highlight, as far as the fact that they're both animal fibers, as far as alpaca fibers and then merino fibers. I think what I find really interesting, especially I have a background in biology and ecology, so hearing the evolutionary aspects of alpacas being bred in these high altitudes, and that's what gives the fibers the characteristics that we're going to talk about in a second here, and then the sheep being bred in other climates and to deal with other like temperatures and moisture and humidity. That's why merino has the characteristics that they have. I think that's a very interesting point that that just is kind of interesting that people should be aware of, and that like we're about to talk about, that's what drives these characteristics for the different fabric types. So you kind of already talked about water absorption a little bit here. Do you know off the top of your head what the percentage is for water absorption or water regain? I know there's some different terms that can be used for textiles.
Yeah, moisture and regain are the best way to talk about moisture in our industry really is how much water does that fiber absorb? Because if you're using these garments the way that we collectively like to use them, you're generally in an environment that's rugged, and you're generally sweating. It doesn't matter if it's cold weather or hot weather. You're going to sweat when you're out there skiing or backpacking or climbing or whatever. And so the reason we've had so much marketing thrown at us about moisture wicking and quick dry, let's make a place for polyester, and so everything can be made out of polyester and nylon. Fact of the matter is, you want your garment to cool you down, and you want your garment to dry quickly, and so which is one of the reasons it makes alpaca such a good fiber, because it only absorbs 10 or 11% of its weight in water. Contrast, merino is at about 30%. So, if you have 10 pounds of merino on and you sweat in it, what's going to wind up being 13? If you have 10 pounds of alpaca on, it's going to wind up being 11. If you have 10 pounds of cotton on and you're sweating, it's going to wind up being 25 pounds. And so so the moisture absorption and the quick dry is part of what makes it a performance fabric. But also, nothing dries quickly, including polyester, while you're sweating. And I've always told people, if you're in a mountainous region, it's 50 degrees and it's moist and you're sweating, polyester is not quick dry. So all you're wearing is a plastic bag. Merino and alpaca, on the other hand, well, they're not going to dry in a moist environment either while you're wearing it and sweating, but they're going to insulate you. And then sometimes people say, well, why do you bring merino and don't you just want to sell alpaca? Well, the thing is, what I would like to see is more and more natural fibers in our industry, not just alpaca. And I would like more people to understand that if you buy these fibers, these are true performance fibers. So I talk to people internally about this word confidence. I have yet to be able to market it effectively, but what I feel like when I'm in the true backcountry, so when I leave the Appalachians, I go someplace like Wyoming or Idaho and I'm in the backcountry, I feel confident when I wear my own stuff. And I wear my own stuff. I don't take down anything. And the reason I'm confident is I know that if I get caught in bad weather or something happens, my alpaca protects me. And merino would do the same thing. And there's some other differences that you'll tease out of me in a while. So I won't keep running my mouth until you ask me the question.
So, sounds good. Yeah, I think that's with regards to the water absorption, that's an interesting aspect that I've noticed. Is it kind of hits that balance where it doesn't absorb a ton of moisture, like you said, cotton's kind of the extreme, but then merino absorbs quite a bit as well, and then you have alpaca, which absorbs enough to keep you cool if you are sweating a little bit. You get some of that evapotranspiration happening, and you'll cool off a little bit, but it doesn't absorb a ton of moisture. That's going to take a long time to dry once you are in an environment where you can dry. It's I definitely found that when I was wearing it. I think it was probably about 100 degrees when I was wearing an 80-20 sun hoodie in the desert of Arizona, and I was warm, but I wasn't overheating necessarily, which I was kind of surprised about.
I always make this analogy to people when they'll say, well, isn't alpaca, doesn't it make you hot? And the same with merino. And my answer is always, well, you don't see a bunch of dead alpacas down in Peru, and it can get pretty hot. And, at 12,000 feet, you're 12,000 feet closer to the sun than you are in the deep south. And so the thing about these fibers is the natural fibers also, not cotton, but I'm talking about the protein fibers, also have good sun protection. But my point, especially from being in the South, and so I've got a lot of experience with this from living in this heat. If it's 100 degrees outside and you're wearing a cotton shirt, it's still going to be 100 degrees. If you're wearing a polyester shirt, it's still going to be 100 degrees. If you're wearing alpaca, it's going to be 100. Alpaca is not going to make you 110 degrees. And so your point is the point. The point is evaporative cooling is what protects you. It's not that you put on an alpaca shirt and you're going to feel like it's 80 degrees when it's 100. And polyester doesn't do that either. Matter of fact, when polyester gets wet and you're sweating, it's not going to dry quick because you're sweating. And now you're wearing a plastic bag again. So the other side effect of me wearing our own stuff for so long is now all of a sudden I can't wear any polyester, not because I'm trying to make a point, but it's so uncomfortable. It's one of those things where I guess over the years you get used to things. And that's all I used to wear is polyester and nylon. And it just feels so slimy and awful now. And the only thing I have that's synthetic in the backcountry is my rain jacket. I actually take my long hiking pants are poly cotton, to wax poly cotton. Once you realize what we left behind when everybody told us we should wear polyester and nylon, and we left behind all these other great natural fibers, and then you go back to them, you're like, well, man, this stuff is really awesome.
Yep. Yeah, and I think I don't, for me, there's definitely a place for polyester and nylon still in my systems, but I think there's a lot of marketing that happens around, and you've kind of touched on this with nylon, with polyesters, especially probably more so than nylon, and especially with base layers and wicking and everything like that. I've seen a lot of marketing about polyester is what you should wear in warm temperatures, and the only time I've had heat exhaustion was when I was wearing polyester because the I didn't get any of the evaporative cooling effect because it just let go of the moisture so quickly. Whereas if you are in a very hot environment, having a little bit of water absorption is going to be helpful in order to keep you from overheating and potentially getting heat exhaustion. So there's a bunch of other facts. Based on my research, there's a bunch of other characteristics with alpaca wool fiber that I want to jump into.
I want to make one more point. So sometimes I get on a roll, and people, I start getting like a Southern preacher. But I do want to say it's not like this is just a commercial for alpaca fiber. It's people say, okay, well, aren't polyester and nylon good for some things? Well, yeah, I'm not. We'll never eradicate that from our closets. I mean, it's here to stay. Plastics are here to stay. I think it's our responsibility to try to reduce our plastic use just because of the microplastic pollution. People might not realize is not coming from plastic bags. It's coming from apparel, mostly. But polyester has this crazy stretching and regain. It's got crazy good tensile strength. Nylon, the thing nylon's made is famous for is its abrasion resistance. It's far greater than polyester. Those fibers, they have some good performance features. It's just what I like to point out is, wait a minute, for some of the things we like to do, the alpaca or the merino shirt, or even you start seeing things made out of yak wool and things, they have way better performance characteristics for the types of performance you need in the mountain environments that we're in. And it's the same thing that makes them good for leisure wear too. But cotton is king in leisure and always will be. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out. Those synthetic fibers have some crazy good performance. It's just that it's the places they're really weak. The natural fibers are really strong.
Definitely, and I think alpaca wool kind of fills this slot where before I'd wear nylon because it did have that good balance of water absorption, durability, sun protection. Whereas merino, I didn't really like the performance as much. Whereas now with alpaca, you have a slightly similar water absorption, so it's going to dry in similar ways as nylon and things like that. So I think that you're bringing this another performance characteristic relative to merino, which I really like. But the other characteristics I want to talk about: softness, durability, warmth, sustainability, and then odor as well. And I think there's probably some other ones that we can dive into as well. But what I'm really curious about too, because something that I've noticed with merino wool, and I don't know if this is a coordinated thing. I call it like big merino out there with a lot of advertising and information kind of saying merino is the best fabric for literally anything. Like there's some copy out there that I've seen from advertisers that basically say merino is the best fabric hands down. And I get it. People want to advertise their product and support it, but I've kind of noticed a little bit of the same with alpaca. There's a lot of good sources out there based on scientific research, but then there's some where I look at it, I'm like, there's some big claims happening here with alpaca. So I want to kind of dive into the characteristics and kind of get the nitty gritty from you on them.
I do a lot of festivals. I still do them, and I still do them because we get these big crowds and people want to talk to us about this product. They've heard about it. And I spend a lot of my time dispelling things that people have seen on the web. And in the merino market and in the alpaca market, there's so much, there's a legal term called puffery. And there's a lot of that. And I try to highlight all the strong points of alpaca, but I do point out some things, and I'll give you a couple examples. There are a ton of them. One is you see in a lot of places
Actually,
where
I'm gonna hold you off on that one. Let's wait till the end and we can tell people some of the limitations of alpaca wool. Let's make them wait a bit for that one. I always like to start off with the good things and then finish off with the compromises.
and when we get to the end, what I would like to do is maybe educate people on the parts of alpaca and merino that I see that are misleading in other places on the web, because I really want people, my whole purpose is so that people understand what they're getting and what it does, rather than saying, this is the best thing, you can jump out of an airplane with it and you can, do whatever. You've got to buy the things that will suit the purpose you're buying it for. And nothing is good for every single thing.
Exactly. Merino wool and alpaca wool, neither's gonna stop bullets if you get shot. So that's
Exactly.
so let's start off with softness, because I think this is an interesting aspect that I think links into, you talked about the lanolin a little bit, as well as the fact that alpaca fiber is closer to being like human hair than merino wool. So you just kind of run us through the characteristics of alpaca wool that makes it soft, I guess.
So yeah, you hear two terms in the market. You can hear, three terms: prickly, scratchy, and itchy. Well, it's all part of the same thing. The main difference, the main physical structural difference between alpaca and merino is that merino has scales. And that's why old school rag wool sweaters, you couldn't tumble dry. You really had to hand wash them, because the scales act like zip ties. And as you agitate them, they go together and they do not come apart. It wasn't until, I believe, the 80s that the technology was invented to strip out the outer layer of merino wool and then go back and coat it with polymer to make it smoother, which made it softer, because those scales that make it shrink were also the major part of why it was so itchy. Because the scales would cut into you, microscopic scales. Most people don't realize when they're wearing merino wool, they're actually wearing, when I say merino, I'm always, in this podcast, I'm always talking about lightweight, washable, wearable merino, generally tops. But when you're wearing that lightweight merino, it's actually merino wool that's had a layer of it stripped off, which makes it weaker. And then they've gone back and coated it with a polymer to make it smoother. And then they've blended it with some level of synthetic fiber. If it's generally less than about 190 grams per square meter, generally what I find is merino products that are over 190 or 200 are more often 100% merino. Alpaca fiber is smooth, and you can go out to the web and find pictures that scanning microscope pictures of a human hair and wool and alpaca and different types of, and even on our hair, you can see little ridges, but they're far apart that look like scales. And alpaca, you can see them, but they're almost imperceptible. And the merino wool and other kind of wool, you can see the scales are very pronounced and very close together. So alpaca is a smooth fiber. And I'll tell you, that's it's a crimpy fiber too. And those are two of the things that made it so hard to process. Nothing sticks to alpaca. We laugh about it. And I am the person, so my partner always has pressed clothes and all of his files in order. And I'm the guy that has papers thrown everywhere. And I ball my clothes up and put them in the drawer. And it's always, look at the shirt. It's all wrinkly. I wear wrinkly. And so when I come to work every morning, I've always got a coffee stain and I've always dripped some kind of breakfast on my shirt. And the funny thing is, with alpaca, you can spill spaghetti on it. And when it dries up, you can just brush it off. It's the fiber's so slick. So it's a smooth fiber. And that's one. And so when you hear the term soft, when I hear soft, I think more of cotton and silk. Well, like when you put cotton or silk on, you kind of don't perceive it's there. When you put on an animal fiber, you can if you've never worn them before and you first start wearing them, you can tell it's there. If you're a person that has worn a lot of these, well, if that 80/20 fabric is so comfortable, but I will say it doesn't matter if it's merino or alpaca. There are some people that can't wear the animal fibers. The protein fibers do not feel good, and both actually can have a prickle factor. And what you're feeling when you feel that is on a new garment. If you feel a few places, it's the end of the fiber in the freshly made garment. Sometimes it's a microscopic short fiber. So if you've ever, best way to explain this is if you have a long piece of spaghetti, it's easy to break. If you have a super short one, you can't break it. It'll actually stick in your skin. Well, so merino or alpaca fibers, when the short fibers that are broken from the process impact your skin, they're both of those fibers are like 40 times finer than a human hair. And that a lot of times is what you're feeling. And then people say, oh, well, my garment has broken. I've worn it for a while. It's broken in. Well, all those short fibers have fallen out. And the short fibers that poke out that are the end of a long fiber have laid down. And that's why most of these type garments, once you've used them for a while, they have a little nap, a little fine fuzz on them. And when they get that way, you put it on, it disappears. So that's the whole thing between the prickle factor, not prickle factor. And this is not scientific, but based on my experience over the last 5 or 6 years, I feel like there are 10 to 15% of people that just can't wear any animal fiber. It just doesn't feel good on them. And I always tell that to people up front, because I have put one of these garments on people that they really want to wear it and they just really can't wear it. And I always say, it's not your fault. And they'll say, well, can I wash it in vinegar? And I'm like, no, that's all BS. You don't believe what you read. If it doesn't feel good now, you're going to, some people literally break out when they put a protein fiber on.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting point that I didn't know about the little ends that could be prickling a little bit. And I encountered that for the first couple wears with my 80/20 hoodie. And then after that, it just became,
it goes
smooth and comfortable. Yeah, exactly. So I think that.
Interesting factoid. A blood cell is about 6 microns in diameter. The finest alpaca fibers and the finest merino fibers that we're all using are around 19 to 20 microns. I mean, it's just a few times thicker than a blood cell. They're super, super fine. A human hair is over 100 or hundreds of microns. So these things, I mean, and people talk about superfine merino and microfibers. I mean, it's when you look at the yard and you pick out a small fiber, it's almost invisible. These fibers are so fine.
So you kind of brought up a point that I wanted to ask about, and I see out there the terms royal alpaca, baby alpaca, and then regular alpaca. What's the difference that's happening between those three?
That's all. So baby alpaca doesn't come off of baby alpacas. And in the early days, I had to convince people that we weren't killing baby alpacas. And a baby alpaca comes off of adult alpacas. And it's one of the finest grades of hair on the body. Just like on your own body, there's certain, like your beard is coarser than your hair. I find there's less standardization in the names of alpaca than there is. I mean, merino just always goes by, like the superfine is always 18.5 micron, 19. Baby alpaca is pretty standard, but beyond that, you get superfine, you get royal alpaca. And so those are just the very finest grades, and they're hand graded. This is something else people probably aren't aware of. Maybe some are. But when you say you've got superfine merino that's 18.5 micron, or you've got royal alpaca that's 19 microns, every fiber is not 19. Every fiber is not 18.5. That's a statistical average. And you've got plus or minus 1 or 2 sigma around that average. So you could expect with a 19 micron fiber, you could probably expect to find up to 22 or 23. You wouldn't expect to find 14s because nature doesn't really make a 14. And the science says that once you get with any fiber, alpaca, well, any animal fiber, alpaca, mohair, rabbit. Once you get up to about 25 or more, that's when you really start feeling the itch. So all these fibers, if they're coarse enough, would feel like a horse blanket. And that's why we all shoot for 21 microns or less in all of our stuff.
Okay, interesting. And so something else I just want to touch on. I think you mentioned with the merino stripping off the lanolin, and scales, and then coating the fiber. That's called superwashing, correct? Is that what they're calling it? And are there companies out there who are superwashing alpaca wool that you know of?
No. So superwash, alpaca doesn't need to be superwashed. And what superwashing does with merino is it strips off the outer layer of the fiber, which is they're stripping off the scales. Without that process, there would be no such a thing as lightweight merino shirts. Much less comfortable merino, because it would just be itchy as all get out. And so I walk a fine line when I talk about this, and I'll just come out and say the superwash process is not environmentally friendly. But for all the people out there, everybody has their favorite brand and their favorite kind of clothes. So I'm not really trying to persuade people to move away from merino, although I am trying to persuade everybody to move away from nylon and polyester. But for everybody that has bought a merino shirt over the last 30 years, they probably aren't buying a lot of polyester shirts, and that's a good thing. But when people say, well, if I'm going to choose between you and merino, we're already not buying synthetic. Well, how is alpaca better? And it's more environmentally friendly and more sustainable. And the sustainable part of it is, at least the way we make it, we don't have to blend synthetic fibers in it. So if you remember a few minutes ago, I said that most, in general, if you have a lightweight merino products that are under 190 grams per meter squared, you're going to find that they're blended with most often nylon, sometimes polyester. And another factoid is that the reason a lot of merino is blended with nylon is because you dye merino and nylon with the same classification of dye called acid dye. And that makes it easier to match the shades. So when you're making lightweight merino, you think of it this way: you've already stripped off part of the fiber shell. That makes that fiber weaker. And so how do you make, people talk in terms of 150 gram and 180 gram. These are super light shirts, and now you're seeing 130s. You couldn't make a 130 gram merino shirt that would hold up to anything other than being a nightshirt you sleep in your house. It just doesn't have the strength. And so they blend it with nylon. With alpaca, because alpaca doesn't have the scales and doesn't have that shrink problem, and it doesn't mean that it's not, you can't just make it like you make cotton, because the resulting fabric is unstable. Part of what we figured out how to do is to make it stable. But you don't have to put alpaca through any type of rugged chemical process to alter the fiber properties. So with merino that has been superwashed, they are altering the fiber properties to meet the fitness for use of the industry. And I will say this: so that's not an environmentally friendly process because they're using chlorine compounds to strip that fiber, just to degrade it. They are coming up with friendlier methods, but they're more expensive, so they're not widely used at this point. But I specifically like when this kind of thing happens, because it's good for everybody. So eventually superwash will go away and it'll be replaced with something that's more like an enzyme wash, or some other kind of thing. When you use chlorine compounds, they have resulting chemicals that wash out in the wastewater that are not good. And back in the days when the textile business was here, most wastewater went to a waste treatment plant. Well, now that it's in places that we can't see and far lands, Industrial waste is not treated in other parts of the world like we treat it here. And so it just goes out in the environment. And so, yeah, it's not environmentally friendly. But so you don't have to, our process is mechanical. It really doesn't require any kind of chemical alteration of the fiber.
Yeah, that's good to know. I was interested because there are slight scales on alpaca wool. So I was just curious if some companies were superwashing, but it's good to know that's pretty much not the case. And then, like you mentioned, we touched on the sustainability aspect with regards to alpaca and superwashing and less chemicals. Chlorine's such a bad chemical for the environment, so the less we can put that out there, the better. Are there other aspects of sustainability that alpaca wool has? I know, like with sustainability, you kind of have the trifecta of like environment, economic, and social aspects. I think the question I get asked is, are alpacas being treated well? Where the wool's coming from? Is it coming from a place where the people they're benefiting from the economy of alpaca? How are those two aspects factoring into things?
Well, so first I would say, I don't want to throw shade on people who raise merino wool, but there are many more merino wool sheep in the world than there are alpacas. I think what you would find is throughout the world, the merino raising operations are much larger, maybe treated a little bit more like livestock. Whether or not they're being mistreated, I don't know. I do know in the alpaca industry, so the alpaca is a major part of the Peruvian economy. Alpacas are revered by the Peruvians. Alpacas have been a part of the Peruvian lifestyle and economy for thousands of years. And these animals are held in the utmost high regard by Peruvians. Largely, so the companies that we deal with are some of the largest alpaca suppliers in the world, and they don't really run their own. They don't have farms. They're textile manufacturing companies. They get their alpaca from alpaca farmers, but what they do is they also provide oversight and new techniques. Much like farmers always have a soil service or whatever in their county, and continuing education and government entities. Here's how you do this better. Same thing happens down there. I always like people to know that one of the benefits that we have as textile veterans is that we don't use any middlemen. As a matter of fact, the yarn we use is our specification. You can't just call down to a mill and say, I want, just give me some yarn. We had to come up with spec. But the mills we use all have what's called the Responsible Wool Standard, the Fair Trade Standard, the OPATEX 100 standard, and that specific one is the standard that tells people that they're not using really awful dyes and chemicals in their processes. They're using chemicals that have been deemed better for the environment. And, I'd also like everybody to know that when you talk about chemicals, when you hear the word chemical, oh, they're using chemicals. Well, yeah, I mean, when you wash your clothes, you're using chemicals. And, even some of these environmentally friendly laundry detergents, like you hear the term washing soda or soda ash. Well, you dump a bunch of that in the creek and it'll kill every fish in there. These are, the chemicals in your house are often way worse than what you would find at a modern mill, aside from maybe some of the dyes. But, when some of the cleaners, it's unbelievable. And the poisons. So yeah, the alpacas are, raising alpacas is not necessarily an industrial thing. It's a farmer-based kind of thing. There was one or two videos that people can find, and someone was acting like alpacas get abused when they're sheared, and it was one of those videos that was taken such out of context because alpacas are really nervous animals. They're fun to be around, they'll look at you and then they'll run away and they're skittish. And they at one point the film showed somebody putting an alpaca down fairly hard. What they didn't show is when it's like a 5-year-old. 5-year-olds don't want to get their hair cut. I screamed bloody murder. I escaped from a barbershop one time. But the funny thing they don't show, so I have been to alpaca shearings. I wanted to see it for myself. And these alpacas are all hanging around you. And then you got to grab them, you got to put them down. You got to hold them still because they're skittish. And you can't, and the shear is the same kind of shears you would use on your beard. And they're shearing them and you don't want them squirming around because you don't want to hurt them. The funny thing is they feel so good after they're sheared and they jump up and they're just hanging around right beside you. It's not like they jump up and they run away, but they make all these crazy noises. And it's the same noises they make when you walk into their little enclosure or whatever, they're skittish. And so, but they're really cool animals. And the other thing you don't realize is if you don't shear an alpaca, the hair just keeps on growing. You have to shear them. You got to remember, these animals did not evolve. They were bred, and they were bred thousands of years ago. So you can't just turn them out into the environment. You can't say run free alpacas. They have to be managed. But yeah, the process is really what I've seen. It's so non-aggressive, other than the fact you got to hold them down to keep them safe while you get the fleece off. But I have seen these animals; they feel so good when they get that fleece off of them.
That's the same with my dog. We just gave him a haircut the other day, and I had to hold him while my wife sheared him essentially, and then afterwards he looks at us, wags his tail, and is happy as a clam.
Well, my dog, man, when we have to cut his hair every now and then and bathe him, he hates me for a day. but anyway, yeah. So, but yeah, that's and I find that in Peru you've got some major industries. There's some mining; they mine some minerals down there. A few other industries, but the textile industry is major down there. I mean, they protect that industry, and they do it right. I haven't seen any issues that would make me feel uncomfortable. And every time a new standard comes out, they get these new standards. We get the emails, hey, guess what? We've got the new blah, blah, blah standard. They've got a whole list of them. And we've written blogs where we show all the seals that we have. And so, yeah, it's all good. I can't speak intelligently on the Merino part. Well, I know there have been some issues with Merino, and I do know it's a much larger industry, but they've come a long way also. And my sense is it's not an awful industry. It's not as bad as what people make it out to be. And Merino sheep they live a pretty decent life, hanging around the mountains.
Exactly. As far as durability goes, I've read, I've looked at some of the stuff online, and it's like alpaca is the most durable fabric that's ever existed, and then other ones, it kind of has some tensile strength numbers where they've given a tensile strength of 50 to alpaca, and then around 30 to 40 for Merino. Do you have any numbers there or information around durability?
Well, interestingly, your numbers are fairly accurate. I would say the alpaca, what you'll also find when you look at just the fiber tensile strength, it's 50 and over for alpaca. You never see hundreds, but then you'll see units like newtons per tex and kilonewtons per decitex, and you've got to kind of understand what these things mean. And I think it's interesting. It's hard to ever find one where the Merino and the alpaca had the same unit. So I don't know if that's on purpose, but in general, alpaca has a higher tensile strength than Merino wool. But to give you an idea of tensile, so tensile strength is the breaking strength. You take a fiber and you pull it. That's important, but if you have a lightweight alpaca yarn with not a lot of twist in it, and you have a heavyweight Merino yarn with a lot of twist in it, well, the Merino yarn's going to be more tensile strength. So So the fiber tensile strength is just a small part of the equation. And if you put it in perspectives, so look at Tencel or Modal, which is, or Lyocell. Those are all three similar fibers that you see a lot these days. They come from tree stock, it could be eucalyptus, it could be beech or whatever. So you have Merino, and then you have Alpaca that's higher than that. Well, then the Tencel is way stronger than both of them. Cotton also. And then way on up the scale is polyester and nylon. And so, so what you said was accurate. But then you got to put it into yarn. And then even with the yarn, you've got to develop your fabric the right way. And then once you've done all that, it's the tensile strength is just a starting point, but it's nowhere close to being the ending point.
Yeah. And that's an interesting point. Earlier in the podcast, I was talking to a tent manufacturer, and they really broke it down to a lot of the time you're testing, it's the fibers that are getting tested, but then the yarns are important, but then the final fabric is important, and you could be changing the properties kind of at any point in the transition from fiber to fabric. And especially once you start integrating these other fibers, like you said, with like Tencel, which you guys have in the 80/20, and then if you have some nylons or polyester, you mentioned some other factors other than tensile strength. Would one of those be like bend strength? I came across that a little bit out there.
There is a test where they can test how many times you can flex a fiber before it breaks. I don't really pay much attention to that particular type of testing because it doesn't have a whole lot of relevance to what we're doing. All these fibers are really well suited for knitting. I'll just give you an example of some tests. So I spend more time on yarn testing and fabric testing than anything else. And so with yarn testing, you have the yarn break strength. You have the elongation at break. With fabrics, you have things like a burst test. You can have a mullen burst or a ball burst, and that's where there's a apparatus that sends a ball end cylinder up through the fabric, and it checks how much force it takes to break the fabric and how much elongation. And the interesting thing is, when we first started making the alpaca fabric, we could not do a ball burst because the alpaca fabric would stretch to the limits of the apparatus for a break. So we went to a mullen burst. And you also do like a trapezoid tear, where you're not really just tearing it straight like a straight square, but you're tearing it kind of at an angle. We also do an abrasion test, because really when it comes right down to it, if you fall off the side of a trail and you fall into a patch of briars, well, you're going to tear every kind of shirt. So puncture with lightweight garments, that's a whole different topic we can get into. But when it comes down to it, like if you've got a backpack, how many rubs can it take? That's what an abrasion test is. And the Martindale test is one that was formulated for upholstery. So how many times can your butt sit in a seat before you wear that seat out? And what it does, it actually, the interesting segue, it uses a piece of wool fabric, because untreated wool, not talking about lightweight merino, untreated wool is pretty rough. It's got the scales, and so they take a apparatus with some wool fabric on it, and they put it on top of your fabric, and it rubs a figure 8. And so I believe 15 or 20,000 rubs is the minimum for upholstery. I think our alpaca got up in the 30 and 40,000 rub range before you had, and it really didn't even rub holes in it. It's the result is how rough the fabric is, or did it fail? And we were always pretty proud of that. But I'm not saying that other fabrics wouldn't test that. I'm just telling you what we do. And so it really comes down to a fitness for use. It doesn't come down to, can you wear this garment for 3,000 miles and then wear it to work for the next 5 years? That really is not what we're looking for. We're looking for something that's not going to break down on you when you're doing the type of activities you like to do. As we all know, any of us that have worn backpacks, backpacks are pretty heavy duty, and you butt slide down rocks enough and you're going to have holes in the bottom of your backpack. on a through hike, you'll wear through 5 pairs of shoes, 4 pairs of shoes, depending on the brand. So the wear out factor honestly is not as important as the fitness for use. The breakdown, you just don't want it to break down. You want it to carry you through whatever activity you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. And particularly with the Martindale test, with the abrasion test, have you tested other fabrics next to Alpaca? Like where would it fall in between kind of like merino and nylon? Those are kind of the two that I'd be more interested in.
Well, so I have not, and I've looked at research on different fabrics, but it would really come down to compare it to merino. We would have to have a merino that had the basic same yarn count. And when I say yarn count, I mean the linear density of the yarn, knit on a similar machine with the resulting fabric that's similar weight. I would say that if you look at those fabrics, if the merino didn't have nylon in it, merino and alpaca would probably be in the same ballpark, whereas nylon and polyester would be way on up, and nylon would be way far exceeding polyester. But nylon, again, the calling card for nylon is its abrasion resistance. That is where nylon is the superstar. But it boils down to, again, the fitness for use. So, and I would say merino and well-made merino and alpaca garments would be better than a standard cotton in terms of that kind of thing. Not as good as in terms of abrasion as a nylon. That's how that breaks down.
Okay, so there's still two more topics I want to cover here with warmth and then odor before we get into some of the limitations and then some of the use cases for alpaca, best use cases. So with the warmth, I've seen the number out there 3 times warmer than merino wool. So maybe touch on that, and then we can talk about as well, like even if it's not 3 times as warmer, what are the factors that alpaca wool has that are contributing it to being a warm fiber?
So alpaca and merino are far warmer than every other type of fiber out there that aren't animal fibers. So we'll start with that. I have seen 3 times and I've seen 10 times. And that's another one of those things that drives me crazy because I don't know why people need to make up things. The science, and not my sales spiel, or not my own testing, but the readily available science says that alpaca is warmer than nylon. I mean, warmer than merino. I don't understand when they say 3 times warmer. I don't know what that means. And honestly, if you had a well-made alpaca garment and a well-made 100% alpaca garment and a well-made merino garment out in the same conditions in the backcountry, they're both going to protect you so much better than anything else. But alpaca is warmer, and that's based on science. Alpaca is some people say that alpaca is hollow. Alpaca is not hollow. It's not like a straw. I have even seen somebody say that alpaca wicks moisture in a capillary action, which is the dumbest thing I've ever seen, and I don't know why people don't get called out. If alpaca sucked up water like a straw, it would not be a good fiber to wear in the outdoors. That's just ridiculous. Alpaca has hollow voids in it. That's one of the things that makes it more insulating. But the real story is the internal structure of the proteins and how the fiber is built from the inside out. Alpaca and nylon are a little bit different in that regard, and alpaca is a little bit warmer. Alpaca is also lighter. So it's got even though it's lighter, it's got the hollow voids in it. It's lighter weight, but has a higher tensile strength. If you have a merino and alpaca fiber, they're the same diameter. The alpaca is lighter, warmer, and higher tensile strength, stronger. That's science. I didn't come up with that. Anybody can research that. And the reason why that's important, rather than just saying tensile strength, is when you put all that together, it allows us to make a little bit heavier weight shirt. So, our 80/20 shirt, it's 20% tensile for a reason. And just a little bit on our shirt, thank you. But, when you add the 20% tensile in with the 80% alpaca, it actually improves the strength of the overall fabric, because tensile has a little bit higher strength. But the 20% tensile also improves the warm weather performance, because tensile is a cellulosic fiber. It's made from eucalyptus trees in a really environmentally friendly process. It absorbs water faster, but it also releases it faster than cotton. And it's got the same kind of softness as silk. The interesting thing about our 80/20 fabric is when you add the 20% tensile in, our fabric still absorbs the same or less water than 100% merino wool. And the tensile, the way it works, and this could be debated, so I reserve some technical expertise leeway because of my experience. But when the tensile has absorbed water, it kind of spreads out. So the fiber is mixed in the yarn. It's not an alpaca yarn and a tensile yarn. The fibers are blended in the yarn. So the water spreads out. It allows it to evaporate quicker. And so you're not sacrificing any cold weather or cool weather performance. You're improving the warm weather performance. But the key thing is, because I'm concerned with strength, we're able to make our shirts in a 5.5, 5.6 ounce per square yard range and still be comfortable, which improves. So heavier fabric is more durable. And I'm sorry to all the ultralighters out there, and I believe in lightweight, I believe in ultralight, but I think some of you guys get too intent on wearing like plastic skirts and things. I've got some really good friends that are ultralighters, and I always kid them. But seriously, we all in the textile industry, even people who make performance fabric, we understand there's a lower limit to the weight durability curve. Just because you have like some of the things like 130s and 140s, I don't have my calculator with me, but you're getting down into the 3.5, 4 ounce per square yard range. An old school Hanes beefy tee, not now, but used to be 5.8, 6.0 ounces per square yard. That's heavy. That's durable. That's why your old anybody that's my age, we have t-shirts that are 30 years old because they don't wear out. The t-shirts they make now that they're importing are rags. And the standard thing is to make them so light, they're not durable. And so just because you can make a 4 ounce or a 3.5 ounce fabric, it doesn't mean you can make a 1 ounce fabric. We'll never be there until they come up with a totally different technology that's based on graphene or something like that. I don't know, but that's the thing. So
I think that's the interesting part is, like, I think when you laid it out as far as like next to merino wool, the alpaca wool is going to be lighter and warmer and more durable. And maybe it's not 3 or 10 times, but it's going to be on that side of the scale. And what's interesting is I like the part about the hollow fibers. You see that a lot out there, and I think, like you said, the way it's described kind of gives the impression that alpaca fibers are like a straw and they're hollow in that way. So is it more that there's hollow parts within the fiber, hollow voids, whereas with merino it's solid, or is there less?
It's more solid. Yeah. It's more solid and less void. So you wouldn't consider merino as a fiber full of hollow voids, whereas you would consider alpaca that way. Another feature of alpaca that's I've not found true, and I can't find where there's science behind it. People say alpaca is static resistant, and I've had the shit shocked out of me wearing alpaca. Hair. Think of your hair when wintertime is dry. Your hair flies. I don't know where that came from. Alpaca, it'll get staticky, and so does merino, and That's another one of those crazy ones. And moisture wicking. People say alpaca's moisture wicking. Well, they have to say it. Most people that are running alpaca fabrics now aren't really textile people. They're other kind of companies that are buying it from somebody. But I actually test this. Alpaca does not wick moisture. It doesn't prevent. Alpaca is highly breathable. It lets the moisture out. Wicking is where moisture creeps along the fiber. And the only thing that really wicks moisture like that is like polyester and nylon that are treated with chemicals. Even people say, well, cotton is moisture wicking. Well, no, cotton absorbs moisture. It's a whole different thing. So that's what keeps alpaca lighter. It's not really absorbing the moisture. It's allowing it to creep around the fiber. It doesn't push the moisture away. So the whole moisture wicking thing is difficult for me because, again, I sound like I'm preaching, and I'm trying to, when I talk to people in person, I'm trying to re-educate them about what the reality of the situation is. It's a thing that I'll never accomplish my goal, but hopefully I can inch along little by little and re-educate people as I go. But honestly, I try not to make claims that aren't accurate. I mean, we all want people to think our fabric is the best and our garments are the best. But if I tell people that our garments do something that they won't do, it's just coming back to us at some point. I want people to understand what they're getting and what it really does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I agree. And I think with alpaca wool, where was I going with that? I had a thought that you had mentioned around alpaca wool. We'll have to just edit this part out.
What? I have that effect on people. I just ramble, make you forget what you were talking about.
I should have made a note. What was it? Yeah, I don't remember. But let's move on to odor and the claims that alpaca wool is odor or smell resistant or smell or odor proof. I definitely have some experience with this and have some anecdotal evidence to provide people, but maybe lay down kind of from your perspective, the smell and odor properties of alpaca.
Sometimes we get a comment where somebody will say, well, I've been backpacking for a month now. Somebody said I smell pretty bad. Well, yeah, they smell bad. But so the whole thing with odor control is another interesting situation. So the protein fibers, what makes them antibacterial and anti-odor is odor comes from bacteria. And protein fibers like Merino and Alpaca do not support the growth of bacterial colonies. But if you're smoking barbecue, you're going to smell like hickory smoked barbecue. So odor masking and antibacterial are two different things. So what happens is I'm going to pick on polyester and nylon. The whole idea of antibacterial, it came because the proliferation of those fibers have led to garments that are really stinky. And people don't realize that polyester microscopically is full of dimples. So when you dye cotton, the dye actually reacts with the cotton. When you dye polyester, it's not really even a dye, it's a pigment. And you heat up the polyester and the little dimples open up and the pigment goes in, and when you cool it down, and the trick is to do that in a level way so that you don't have splotches. That's a really oversimplified version of it. But bacteria resides in those same dimples. They're microscopic. And then your body funk resides in there. And detergents are not really good at getting that out. And so that's where you get that permafunk in polyester. We've all had it in our workout clothes. You can wash it, and the detergent you use will mask it with a little bit of fragrance, but you put it on and you've had it on 5 minutes, and all of a sudden you're like, God almighty, this thing really stinks. And that doesn't happen. For those of you that might listen to this podcast, if you happen to be a type of person that wears a suit in your at work, well, most suits are made from worsted wool. How many times do you send them to the cleaners in a year? You hang it up. You might have, if you're a suit wearing person, you might have 2 or 3. You hang it up, it freshens up because it's wool. And alpaca is the same way. So what happens is, if you stink and you're wearing an alpaca hoodie, well, yeah, you might still stink. But the alpaca hoodie is not going to harbor these bacteria that get ingrained, that ingrained funk that shows up as soon as you start sweating, because what you're smelling is the funk and the sweat coming off your body. You hang it in the closet and they get fresh on their own. And that's why I always tell people that you don't have to wash these garments much. And it's not because they're delicate. We make the fleece where you can wash it and tumble dry, but it's because you just don't need to wash them that much. They freshen up on their own. And so the protein fibers, they don't support the growth of bacteria. That's where you get the anti-funk.
Yeah. And I think that it's that permanent funk that people are, like you said, are very familiar with. And I wore the 80/20 shirt for 5 days. I slept in it. I hiked in 100 degrees Fahrenheit in it. And then I got to a parking lot and I convinced these 5 women to sniff me, and they could not smell anything on me after 5 days of wearing this shirt and hiking hard and sleeping in it. They said it just kind of smelled like dust, which makes sense because I was in the desert. And once I got really in there, I could smell in my armpit, I could smell it. But I think, like you said, like that was my own odor as opposed to the shirt. And I took the shirt off, aired it out for about an hour, and then there was no smell with it. It was pretty crazy. I was a little bit blown away by that performance aspect.
Well, and again, I mean, for all the things we talk about in terms of synthetic versus the animal fibers, the other thing that happens with these synthetics, you got to remember, the antibacterial and the moisture wicking, they all wash away eventually. These aren't permanent. Some people will say, oh, our antibacterial is embedded in the fiber. Well, really? So what good is an antibacterial chemical in the middle of a polyester fiber? How does it work on the outside where the bacteria is? There's just so much misleading marketing out there. But again, every time you wash those synthetic garments, that stuff is washing off a little bit. And eventually it just becomes a plastic bag again.
Yeah, exactly. I'll have to have someone from like Polygene or one of those companies that produces the antibacterial on to chat. And I also want to bring someone on to chat about moisture wicking, because I think we kind of touched on it a little bit. There's a lot of information out there about moisture wicking and what it means, and I question sometimes whether I question, and I think I'm probably right on this, is whether the way it's used the majority of the time is a true representation of what that term means and how it leads to performance.
If I had been on my game, I would have found this research, but I found somewhere where a 50/50 Tencel polyester shirt actually dried faster than 100% polyester moisture wicking shirt.
Interesting.
And maybe people that watch this can prove me wrong and say they can't find it, but I found that somewhere. And but I understand part of the reason why. So the moisture wicking chemicals they put on polyester, you think about it, they wick moisture because they want the moisture. They attract moisture. So they don't easily want to give up the moisture. We used to put moisture wicking finishes on polyester back in the 90s. I know exactly how it works. I know the chemicals they use. I've even got some in my house because some of my old polyester garments I just don't want to throw in a landfill. I treat them with this chemical every now and then to put the moisture wicking back in it.
Yep. Nice. Yeah, that's good information. We'll have to get some people in the comments of the YouTube video to track down some stuff. But that I think we kind of went through pretty good in depth into the different characteristics and benefits. Let's talk about some of the limitations or drawbacks with alpaca wool. Let's just quickly run through some of those.
So, overall, you back to that fitness for use thing. I would say for any pursuit that we like to do, we've created a fabric that fits the bill. And as a subset of that, that means that they're also good for any leisure activity. I would say if you want to do a strict, hard line comparison between a 100% nylon shirt that's exactly the same weight as a 100% alpaca or 100% merino shirt. If you take care of the merino and the alpaca, they'll last just as long as the synthetic. In fact, they have found alpaca garments on 1,000-year-old mummies, you know. But the way that, you know, all of us modern people use things and the way that we've gotten used to maybe not taking care of our stuff like people 60 or 70 years ago did, you could abuse a nylon shirt a lot longer than a merino or an alpaca. You would wear out the merino or alpaca a lot sooner than a nylon. But aside from that, you know, I would say that the key with merino and alpaca, and when I'm saying merino now, I'm saying 100% merino. If you know how to take care of your garments, they'll last you for years. We routinely have people that have worn our same garment for 2 through hikes. Now, it looks like it's been in a battle, and I've never, ever worried about that. In fact, if you can make it on 1 through hike with the same hoodie, it's going to have some holes in it. The elbows might blow out of it, you know. But the key is, did it get you there? Because that one garment got you there, and it took you 3 to 5 pairs of shoes. You ever noticed how nobody really ever complains about their shoes? You know, and people say, oh, well, my shoes are hitting the ground. I step, you know, 1 million steps a day. Well, if you're wearing an alpaca shirt, every step, the backpack's going up and down. So every step is 2 rubs of that Martindale test. So the bottom line is, in a very black and white way, your synthetic fibers, they last longer. But if you take care of your gear, the gear that's supposed to take care of you, alpaca and merino both will last as long as you need for them to. In fact, if you're not a hardcore outside person, you know, these things will last for years. The other thing, so this holds true with any knit product, whether it's cotton or merino or alpaca. We make our stuff for a comfort fit. This is my opinion. I do not like the tight fit tech stuff. Tight fit tech stuff like polyester is that way because if it is any looser, it really doesn't work. That polyester needs to impact where your sweat is. That's the only shot it has. What I found I'm not reading this anywhere, but I've used this stuff for years. I've used merinos and I use my own stuff. Animal fibers like a little room to breathe. And that's why all of our stuff is made like we call it a comfort fit, not really a tech fit. For the 80-20, it's more of like a t-shirt fit. If you have a little bit of airspace between your skin and the garments, it lets them breathe better, lets them insulate better. You know, what you'll find with a garment like this that you're not supposed to wash much is people say, well, it got a little baggy. We've created a fabric you can wash and tumble dry. So when they like the hoodies, they get a little baggy, you wash and tumble dry it, it won't shrink. It goes back to its original shape. But that's the same thing. Nobody ever wears their cotton t-shirts 20 times because they just start smelling too bad. And so, but any knit good made from any kind of natural fiber, so not polyester or nylon, if you wear them enough, they get looser because it's a knit product and these fibers will loosen up and you wash them and then they'll shrink back. So I would say that's one thing that people that are new to the fabric might go, oh, well, I've worn this 10 times and, you know, it's a little bit baggy, but they just have to get used to how to take care of it, how to wash it. And actually people that go on a trail, you know, they poke a hole in it. We send out patches. We like people to darn their stuff and to put patches on because, and I just wrote a blog on fast fashion about a month or so ago. We've gotten so used to buying things and they get a hole in it, we throw it away, you know. And the whole thing, I mean, think in the old days, the first people that hiked the Appalachian Trail, they were taking pots and pans, and they were wearing heavy cotton canvas, and you can't do that anymore. But there's something to be said for taking care of your gear, and it takes care of you. Think about climbers. Climbers don't drag their ropes through the dirt. There aren't any rope manufacturers that are going, hey, we just made a rope and you can walk on it and you can drag it through the dirt and it's still going to be good. No, climbers don't want to be on a rock with a rope that's been dragged through the dirt 5 times. So everything has to be taken care of.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think those are two. I've definitely encountered the stretch, and then I threw it in the washing machine, and it was all good afterwards, back to the original fit. And I could definitely see how that would be surprising to someone if they first got the shirt, wore it for a bit, and then had that sag. So,
well, it's funny when you hear people talk about old brands from the 70s when they first came out, and then the products when they first came out, they were so awesome, but then index forward 15 years and you look back, oh, that product sucked, but it's gotten so much better. Well, the funny thing to hear come out of my mouth is I would say the same thing about our early stuff. Not that it sucked. It was the best thing ever when it came out. We got the Backpacker Editor's Choice Award. The hoodie hadn't been out 6 months when we got that. But that version of the hoodie is not even in the same ballpark as the one we're making now, because everything goes through an evolution. So one of the things in the old days for us was that tall people loved our stuff because it would always get about 2 or 3 inches longer. But it would still shrink back to where it was. But we've done a lot to minimize that. So when you wear stuff like this, it won't just keep getting bigger, 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 bigger. It goes to a certain spot and stops. But yeah, so it's a matter of understanding the product. And, once you understand how it works and what you're going to get out of it, then it's all good.
I think that's a good segue to the last question here, as far as where's Alpaca will it go from here? Like what's the next iteration for the product? How do you see it being integrated into maybe other products as we move forward?
Well, so one of the things we're working on right now is a heavier weight version and a heavier weight hoodie. So if you pay attention to comments over the years, we continually get the suggestion that we put thumb holes and kangaroo pockets. And when you look at a picture of our stuff or you see a picture of somebody wearing it, well, you don't get the visual understanding of how different it is from a polyester fleece. The polyester fleeces are more substantial, but not as warm. Our hoodie specifically, that fabric, we developed it to be the perfect combination of lightweight and high performance. And we want it to be a very clean design. That's why there are no pockets in it. We've got the standard t-shirt top seam and standard sleeve attachment. We're not putting drawstrings because the other thing people don't understand is when you see tech garments that have seams that go everywhere and they look cool, every place you put a seam is a weak spot in that fabric. Seams are always weaker because you're poking holes in the fabric. And so we wanted a minimum number of seams and we wanted a minimum of bells and whistles. And that's what we did. So the fabric itself is lightweight. It wasn't made to hold up to a kangaroo pocket that you're going to put your cell phone in, your battery, and put your hands in it. So now we're working on the next iteration where it's a little bit heavier weight version. It won't be as good for warmer weather, but it'll handle some thumb holes and some bells and whistles. Probably won't get out this year. We've made a couple of prototypes. We've had some people testing them, and actually the heavyweight ones are so warm, it's incredible. You can't even wear them inside. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to look at blends with these other natural fibers like Tencel. You take a fiber like that people identify with a fashion fiber, and they think, oh well, I mean you can't make that into an outdoor. Well, you don't want 100% Tencel or 100% cotton shirt on when you're in the Smokies or when you're a lot of places. But if you know how to develop fabric, we develop our fabrics from the ground up, and you can develop the yarns from the ground up, and you can develop the fabric structure and the weight and all that. You can do some amazing things. So And just for everybody watching, if you get a bamboo shirt or you get a hemp shirt, it's all the same. Bamboo and hemp is generally the rayon process, not the tencel process. If you see tencel or lyocell, that's the same process. It's environmentally friendly. Rayon process is not really environmentally friendly. And then you got modal, which is right in the middle. But like with a bamboo shirt, you're not getting a shirt that had bamboo that somebody beat the hell out of it and stripped the fiber out. It was melted down into cellulose and reconstituted into fiber. So they all feel virtually the same. But I'm interested in one of these days. So you notice we don't have any bottom weight stuff. So we want to develop some bottom weight stuff, some leggings, maybe some looser fit kind of warm up stuff. I really would like to get into some hemp canvas, things like that. So our future is going to be to continue down that road of looking at natural fibers. And the reason we don't have alpaca in our name, alpaca is where we got our start. And I do want to plug ourselves for, we were the first and only people in the world still that have 100% alpaca fleece. There are a lot of people that advertise that we have alpaca this, merino that, and it's really 50%. I don't even know how somebody can advertise their garment as merino or alpaca if it's only got 50% of that fiber. But we are going to develop other fabrics with sustainable and natural fibers. And so that's why I didn't really want to pigeonhole us long term into being the alpaca people. We want to be known as the people that developed alpaca into this specific market, and we won't ever turn away from it. And we're going to develop more alpaca things, maybe socks. I mean, I don't think we can't raise the bar on socks. The sock business, socks are being made about as well as they can be made right now. And the leading companies you know of, they're all great companies. But at some point, we might make our own socks. We might.
I'd love to see alpaca socks with toes because I love toe socks for blisters. But then also an alpaca wool sock for winter camping for me, I think would be phenomenal.
Yeah, it makes it's. I've got some alpaca socks. I've bought a bunch of different types, and they're so comfortable. It's unbelievable. None of the ones I've bought I have found are really good for backpacking yet for a number of different reasons. And back to your other question, you can edit this backwards. Alpaca doesn't have the best compression and regain as so if you look at a sock, my alpaca socks tend to get really flat. I would say, Merino's compression regain in terms of a sock is a little bit better than alpaca, but you can overcome that with the blend. So all backpacking socks, and this is the issue, you can't make 100% alpaca or 100% merino sock for the outside industry. They just don't hold up. You have to have nylon and you have to have an elastomeric. But that's why you don't see merino or alpaca stuffed into sleeping bags, because they tend to flatten out. And, when you have a stuffing-based sleeping bag, your warmth is based on the airspace. We do have a sleeping bag called the Ugly Bag that's not based on airspace. It's based on the fleece. And what's interesting is I still use mine. We've had probably 75% positive, 25% negative on it. The only negative being that some people don't find it as warm as what they were expecting. But so what we're doing with that one right now is trying to evolve that too, because I really believe in having that kind of a thing out there. And our bag liner, we barely can keep them in stock. The bag liners are phenomenal because you can buy a polyester bag liner that's 8 ounces and it doesn't work. Yeah, I love the idea of bag liners. Always did. It was another factoid is the bag liner. Once we got the t-shirt fabric made, I actually really wanted to make a bag liner first. When I finally made the bag liner, I realized how good it worked. I felt so good about it. It's heavier than the silk ones and the polyester ones, but what I tell people is it really works. It's not like with the polyester ones, you're buying this thing and you put it in your pack and it's not doing anything but taking up space. And so my whole idea was, okay, mine's not going to be ultralight, but it's going to work. if you need a bag liner, you need it for a reason. And it's not heavy and it balls up. You can put it in an extra small compression sack. And I just leave mine in my sleeping bag actually and stuff out. But man, it works. So anyway, that's what I'm going to be looking at other fibers and other combinations along the lines of the natural fiber path that we've been going down.
Awesome. That's great info. And I appreciate the chat today. We covered a ton of ground. I'll have links in the show notes and the video description, so people can go check out Appalachian Gear Company and the products. I definitely recommend checking out the 80/20 sun hoodie and t-shirts, and then there's the all alpaca fleece sweaters as well, and then the bag liner that you mentioned. Great products. I've been super happy with mine, so definitely go check those out. Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on the show, John, and kind of giving us some really good info for alpaca and kind of dispelling some of the myths that are out there as well.
Well, I really appreciate you having me, and you're going to have a hell of a time editing this thing. But I do want everybody to know, I mean, when they hear me speaking, I'm really all about, if people don't choose us, choose something that's more natural. Start looking away from polyester and nylon, because there are a lot of us small companies out here. There are a lot of good small American-based merino companies. Look at them too. I think the more people that realize how good this stuff really is, and then that whole confidence thing, the light will go off in your head. And when you get in that backcountry and you got something on that really protects you when you need it, when you have that confidence, it just makes everything so much better. And small companies like us are the ones that are doing all the innovation right now. Large companies are just, mass marketing. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and the innovation is such a fun aspect, and that's a big reason why I wanted to have you on the show. So thanks a lot, and yeah, hope you have a great rest of your day.
Look us up if you come to North Carolina.
Will do.